Hi, everybody. This is John Forrester, and I'm here with Julie Ireland. Want to say hello, Julie?
Hello, Julie. I couldn't
Julie,
resist. I'm sorry. I just
Julie is in
couldn't.
a fun
Isn't
mood
that
this morning.
Gracie?
All right. Well, we're here for Stalking the Scary Projects, and this webinar idea came out of Julie's article on describing what she went through with using GTD when her mom was passing. And it also was inspired by Andrea Churchill's In Conversation, where she described using GTD to deal with scary projects. So we had lots of people write in or email and let us know that they'd like to have a webinar on this topic. So this is in response to what many of you asked for about a webinar to deal with the scary projects. So that's where we're coming from. Julie, what do you have to say about this and scary projects and what you hear from coaching clients on this?
Well, part of me, I kind of, John and I went back and forth about the name of this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but, kind of the word that was really coming forward for me is elusive. It's like, what are these, like, funny things that kind of float around, sort of right under conscious awareness that we just haven't really, been able to look at. And John and I had kind of, in preparation for this webinar, we had just kind of gone back and reread Stalking the Wild Projects, which I think is included in the invitation for this, right, John?
Right, and I also sent a link to it in the chat box. It's in the
And
document library on Connect.
it was just really fun for me to go back and read it because it's been a while, it's been a while since I've looked at that. And it was just such a great reminder about, one of the things that David, really re-emphasized for me in that article was that he says, nailing down the real outcome we're committed to in these situations when the answer is still not clear takes awareness and focus. And I really love that. It's like we don't have the answer, so we just kind of avoid looking at it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, in my experience, like in my own kind of evolution with GTD, which is, a little over 12 years now, I find that things get more subtle. Like when we're beginning GTD, we haven't really, we're just trying to figure out what a project is. And so, like the bigger, kind of more obvious things, are kind of what we start to work with. And then as we kind of move in from understand to install to implement, like things can get a little more subtle. And it's like one of the things that I'm always on my growing edge with GTD is like, yeah, what are, if I really am honest with myself and I'm in my integrity, and holding myself to really high impeccability with GTD, do I really have a complete inventory of my projects? Is that actually accurate?
Yeah,
Not as a way to like judge myself, but it's like, what am I really not looking at here?
I like the way you've described that. It's instead of scary, we could have said stalking the subtle projects, stalking the not quite defined projects, stalking the elusive projects. I consider this to be a more advanced webinar. This isn't for the folks who are still just trying to get to the point where they know the difference between a next action and a sequential action that depends on something else. This is for those of us who have been doing this for a while and are really looking to get more pristine, more thorough with getting everything off our mind. So this is about what's more on the edges of your mind that you haven't quite defined into your system yet.
Yeah, I love what David writes in the article. They are situations you implicitly have committed to change or improve, but haven't gotten a grip on yet. And I really love that emphasis on implicit. So that's what happens. Like inside of us, it's like something is kind of off, or it's just
Mm-hmm.
not, but we haven't externalized our thinking. We haven't made it explicit. And so, there's sort of this, just kind of magnet for resistance or,
Yeah. Yeah. So we could call, instead of scary, I just picked scary because in a way it was a little bit of a provocative word to use. But and as you can see, the photo that my wife picked out for this slide deck, she was in a funny mood yesterday when she picked this out. She said, "How about this for the scary projects photo?" And it could have been do you have any implicit projects that you'd like to make explicit? That kind of thing. So if scary is a scary word, use elusive, implicit, undefined, that sort of thing. But that's kind of what we're here for today, is to help get to the point where some of those projects that aren't really projects yet, or that you haven't clearly defined, stuff that wakes you up at night or keeps you awake at night, that's what we're here for. The intent is to move forward on projects that you have defined but are scared to take action on, not clear about taking action on. And we may also get to projects you haven't defined and start to get to define those.
Yeah.
We're going to look at a couple of ways of going after this. And I thought one way to start would be to have Julie talk about what she hears consistently from coaching clients that shows up in the way of projects that are either not completely defined or are somehow scary or not quite conscious because there's some reason we're not ready to deal with them.
Yeah. So, just kind of in my preparation for this, just thinking about the themes that show up in coaching. There's very, very common themes that show up. One that I really see consistently is health. So, health is an area of focus, as we know. It's not a project, but it kind of sits. It sort of just sits. I see this very, very, very consistently with clients, where kind of, well, I should do something about my health, or I'm not really taking care of myself, or I should exercise more, I should be eating better, lots of shoulds. I really, my body isn't the same as it was when it was 30. Kind of these themes show up,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of, I can kind of look at someone and or hear them and really see how there's an avoidance there of like, what does it really mean to you, and what do you really want to do about that?
Yeah.
So it's like they'll define like, well, I'd like to do something about my health, but it's like there's a gap in terms of, well, what's really the outcome that you are committed to doing something about, and what what's really happening here, like what's really your commitment.
Yeah. So are you finding that there are you frequently hear about clients that they've got a project sort of defined but haven't taken action on it? Maybe it's listed in an area of focus, but it hasn't
Yeah,
been
it's
brought
sort of,
down to project with a clear next action.
yeah, like there's some abstractness to it. I don't know, is that a word, abstractness? Did I just make that up?
That's a good word to make up.
Yeah, so it's sort of in the land of abstractness versus really real clarity. And, health, I think, is just a good example. Or finances, money. Health and money are the two things where I really see that show up. Like,
Mm.
well, they'll have a project like, get my investments in order, or get my will and advanced care directive set up, but then they just don't. There's momentum, there's no
Yeah.
movement.
Well, get my investments in order sounds closer to an area of focus, but not really a defined project, because what's
Yep.
in order mean? And
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are just sometimes there are these kind of, areas of focus that there's just some level of avoidance around. And so we can just kind of like in GTD, like sometimes with email, like people can get really great about processing their inbox to zero. Like I like that, people love to email me screenshots of their empty inboxes. And sometimes when I take a closer look, it's like, well, you got it to zero, but did you really? Did you
yeah.
really make those clear action decisions? And this shows up at the project level too.
Hmm.
So, like, yeah, I get my investments in order. It's like sort of like this odd, you know, sort of like not clearly defined outcome. And, if the outcome isn't defined clearly in terms of what we're actually committed to doing, it's going to be really hard to get any momentum around a next action.
Hmm. Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm curious to hear from those who are on the webinar whether they find that they get inbox to zero, but don't quite have that feeling of real relief knowing that all the projects are fully defined? Or another way to ask that would be, do you still think about something in the middle of the night, or is there any sense of anxiety or a should be doing more about any of the projects that you have on your list? If you've got something like that, feel free to type it into the questions box too, because I want to make Julie, as our coach, available to help define some of those and be a live coach for you here too. I'm curious whether folks are finding that. It looks like a couple of people are saying that, yeah, they do have projects that are not quite nailed down.
I have this, not everyone probably a little tired of my family examples, but a few years ago, like my transparency, I was at a family reunion, and I was at the airport on my way back from that reunion, and there was a particular family member that I was just having all kinds of challenges with, and I kind of held it together, and then I got to the airport and I kind of fell apart a little bit. So what did I do? Like, I called my lifeline, Meg Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
And Meg was like, okay, Julie, like, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of, have your little emotional process. And then we're going to get down to brass tacks with this. And it was just really terrific. She's like, what's the problem? What's the problem here?
Mm.
And, that's within your control. Like, oh, I want to change this person. Like, it's not a problem. Yeah. But she really got me into that. Like, what's really the issue here that I'm willing to do something about?
Mm-hmm.
And it really was like, it's like I could have sat on an airplane for 5 hours and been like anxious and stressed about that. In about 5 minutes, she really coached me in terms of, well, I basically had to define what I wanted my relationship to be with this person. It's like I had to define my role. And it was so great. It was like all of this, just like this emotional stuff kind of lifted. And then like, what's the next action? Like I got really clear about a next action. And so, I invite everyone into this. It's like if there are, relationships, in your life that, it's like you think, well, you have the project, somewhat defined, but is it really what you're up to? Because I just find that, like I said earlier, if the project, either it's just sort of defined too abstractly, or it's not really what my commitment is, it will sit there.
Uh,
Is that helpful?
I find it helpful. I hope those who are listening find it helpful too.
Well, John and I had this conversation earlier. I'm so used to one-on-one coaching, so this is also my transparency. Like being on these webinars is such a stretch for me. Like it was like one of my scary projects, which is just to agree to do this webinar. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah, we are doing our best to be transparent about this. We found that as soon as we set out to do a webinar on scary projects, the webinar itself became a scary project. So
Exactly.
we're eating our own dog food, so to speak. Let's see. One of the things that I found from talking to people and dealing with my own scary projects is a lot of the times it's when I'm telling myself I should do something, but it's not really within my sphere of control or even influence. So It helps to say, nah, realistically, I'm not going to make that person change or get them to behave differently. So do I still have a project here? If so, let's get it down to what I do have control over, what I can make a difference on. And the other thing I deal with is often for me, some of the keywords that we're showing here, what holds me back is if I'm making it more complex or thinking it'll cost a lot of money, something like that. A couple of days ago, I heard that we may need to dig up the sewer line from our house out to the street. So, of course, I was very imaginative in thinking about that being a project that was too scary to deal with, and I buried my head in the sand for about an hour on that one.
Well, I love the triggers that you had here: complexity, money, pain, fear, negative fantasy of done. Like that's the sewer. Like, oh my God, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I find, this is where it really does enable us to take control over what we have control over. So you might not want to do that project. It might be the last thing you want to spend money on, but might be something that you have to do. It's so interesting because with my mom's house, and her estate and everything, I have to dig up the sewer line. And I was the same way. I was like, what? One more.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like I realize like I don't have to like something in order to make an agreement to do something about it. I don't have to feel like it either. So it's one of those things. It's like in my own maturation process with this, it's like it's okay. Like I don't, I can move into a high level of acceptance with something and still define what it looks like and not have to really want to do it or like it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I find the more that we kind of unpack that stuff in terms of, what is it? One of the things I really see show up in coaching is, there's a fear underneath something, like a fear of something not going well, or a fear of something, turning out to be, less than, you know, exceptional, or whatever that is. And so it holds
Mm-hmm.
us back from defining it in the first place. And I think, the sewer thing is a great example. It's like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, after I got out of the initial fear and my fantasizing about how much this was going to cost, and as much as anything, it was the time too. It's not just the money; it's the time it would take and the inconvenience. I began thinking of it almost as a metaphor that the plumbing is usually something I take for granted, and it's almost an area of I can turn it over and it can be unconscious about it. And for me, the projects that wake me up at night are the ones where I've tried to send them down the plumbing and not be conscious about them. And this process helps me to become more conscious, more surface things, and make them really explicit and say, here's the outcome. I'm seeing some comments from some of the folks in the questions box that these tend to be around health and family, often around parents who are getting older. Um,
Yeah.
Mine have both passed by now, but believe me, I can tell you for 10 years my dad had Alzheimer's, and my brother and sister and I consistently dealt with having to make clear decisions about what is the project here and what do we have under our control. Those areas of health and family, or the health of another family member, especially when it runs into finances, those are the ones that I often hear aren't clearly defined as projects.
Yeah. Are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions
Let's
around this?
see. Yeah, well, this was a statement, and I think it's got some implicit question too from Uji. It's legacy issues. Boy, anything that crosses generations. So,
Mm.
Julie, have you had this show up, and how do you coach clients about this sort of thing?
Well, I guess maybe Uji, what specifically? I'm not sure what you mean by legacy issues. So,
Yeah,
because I'm not
I may
I'm
have
not really
been,
quite clear.
I may have been reading more into that than she said based on other conversations I've had. Can you rephrase that in the form of a question, or say a little more about it?
Yeah, I don't want to try to make my own interpretation if she's asking something else.
Yeah. Let's see here. What happens to our farm life after we are gone? What project do we need to do
Mm.
now to ease the follow on? Okay, well said.
Yeah, so to me, yeah, defining a succession plan, or defining the kind of the what's next. I keep referencing this article just because I found it to be so, just really, really rich. David says, like, people don't have the answer, so they don't take the opportunity to define a project of resolution, clarification, or research. So to me, like, that's maybe just, it could just be like a look into what would this look like? What would a succession plan look like?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one of the things I'm getting more comfortable with. I think we're kind of blending the kind of this aspect of the webinar in a way with the ones that haven't been defined, and I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like look into as a project. I'm getting really comfortable with that versus like I have. It's like I might look into taking a painting class versus like learn to paint.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
so funny. Even as I say that out loud, like the first, there's like a little element of joy, and when I say learn to paint, oh my God, I totally like hit the panic
Mm-hmm.
button.
Yeah. So a look into project or an R&D project versus
Yeah.
a make it happen project.
Yeah, I think that shows up quite a bit. And once again, this is the advanced GTD. It's like it's more subtle. So someone will have a project defined as, hire a new hire a new executive assistant. When like a part of them, they're not either they're not sure they need one,
Mm,
or they're not sure they have really the money to do that, or they're not sure. It's like, we need to really redefine that outcome is research, look into hiring a new EA, or
hmm.
look into what resources are available for this,
I think
because
there's
it has
something
to do with what
interesting
we're
you said
committed to.
there. Yeah, I want to go back to something you said just a moment ago about the difference in how you feel inwardly depending on
Mm.
how you phrase the project. I think there's a clue there for people if they phrase the project in a way that it's really clear and it's within their control, something they really are ready to move forward on. It rings inside versus goes clunk.
Yeah, like I'll know because I'll start to feel some relief around it.
Hmm.
And if I define a project and I feel more tension around it, I have to unpack it. And once again, like this has taken me what, 10, 12 years to finally, it's like, in my own process of just kind of taking deeper cuts around all of this.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of my barometer. Like I'll know if I start to kind of either get excited or feel a sense of relief or both.
Hmm.
Or, versus like, oh, if I start to tighten up a little bit, it's like, wait a second, like that to me, that's my body and my brain letting me know that I'm about to make a commitment that I'm not really prepared to honor.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
that, I'm really grateful now because I kind of catch myself more on the front end. Whereas, for the past how many years, like I'd have a lot of projects on my list, and I'm pretty impeccable about doing weekly reviews, but it's like the actions weren't moving on those projects, and I would like, why? Like, why am I not moving on
Hmm.
this? I didn't, and now I kind of have a better understanding. It's like, well, how can I take action on a project I'm really not committed to in the first place? It's just not going to work.
Yeah, which brings us back to I think David's original definition way back that I've heard years ago of a project is an outcome I'm committed to achieve usually within say 12 to 18 months. I know some people like Uji has projects that span generations, but if it's really something I'm committed to, that's different than it's on my project list because it's a should or something like that. And I want to go to a question from Corey. You know Corey. His
Corey,
his
Father Campbell.
question his question is, how do you check yourself on whether or not you are trying to change something outside of your control or influence?
Well, that's a great question. It's a really great question. I'm trying to think how I would approach that. So, well, I think the results, first of all, will generate your answer there. So if I'm trying to control something that's outside of that, like, say, like it's interesting. So I love how this stuff shows up, kind of in the timing. So I had this wonderful coaching call yesterday with a client, and we were talking about her board retreat that's coming up. And we walked through the natural planning model, which we can talk about later, which I think is always a great resource for this.
Mm-hmm.
But she realized, like, from doing that she kind of had her own agenda versus what was really maybe the bigger agenda of the board. And she was kind of like trying to kind of get them kind of on board with her agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We had to really look at that. It's like, well, did you feel like you're in integrity, around trying to kind of control something that's not really within your control? And she said, absolutely not. So part of it, Father Campo, might be you're coming back to your values. Like, am I in alignment with my values? So if I really value being in my integrity, or I really, hold a value of like being, impeccable around my honesty, does it feel, is like creating this project the way I've set it up thus far, does that feel in alignment or doesn't it? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of us, like that's a good barometer check.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We've also got, I'll combine this into one question, but it's coming in from two people. Let's see, Uji brought this up and also Dave. Hi, Dave. Good to see you. They both said in one way or another that they're not keen on having a lot of look into or research projects because those feel either undefined or it's easy to still not take action on them. So anything you can say to
Well,
make it
yeah,
easier
once
to
again,
have lots of look into projects?
yeah, well, I love the question. I really thank you guys so much. It's like, to me, it's like, am I committed to looking into this versus like, am I committed to doing it? So like, I might, like I said, I'll go back to the painting class. Like, I might really be committed to looking into that because that feels something I can really say yes to a next action on versus like take a painting class. I'm not committed to doing that, but I might be committed to doing the research. Once again, I'm just gonna read that quote again from David because I think it's really speaks to that. Because people don't in the moment have the answer to the situation, they don't take the opportunity to define a project of resolution, clarification, or research. So it's like perfectly sanctioned to me to define the outcome as, look, I'm gonna do the research here. Like maybe you don't like the word look into, so you don't have, I mean, don't call it look into if that phrase doesn't resonate. But research for most people, I think, it's just another way of saying it, or R&D. So I'm going to
Hmm.
R&D taking a painting class. I'm going to R&D finding a new yoga studio. I guess I'm curious, and we can't really open to kind of the verbal conversation around this, but I'm just curious what the resistance is to
Yeah, so
look
um,
into.
a couple of you mentioned the not really feeling great about or having problems with look into or research projects. So feel free to type more if you have more detail on what doesn't work for you about those kinds of projects. For me, I find that when I'm on the edge of doing a look into or research project, often I'll tell myself I should do more, that I should be making a bigger commitment to it. So a lot of times for me, it's getting comfortable with turning back to myself, whatever that voice is, and saying, so who's saying that? Why should I commit to this more than I am? Is it part of my job? Is it part of my agreement with family members or other people? Is there really an agreement that I've made with myself or someone else that drives me to that should about making a larger commitment than just a look into commitment? And that often is helpful to
Yeah.
me to realize, no, I really don't have an agreement in a bigger way that means I would have to commit to it more than looking into it.
Well, I love that, and the should is that's tricky, right? I just watch that, with myself, and I watch when it shows up. I'm just kind of pretty vigilant for that word showing up because it's like, says who? Like, what is that? I should do something. How is that playing out internally around an agreement I'm making versus like an expectation that someone else might have.
Mm-hmm.
I heard this
Yeah.
great audio the other day. It was about, I think maybe Father Campo and I talked about this, but it was a expectation versus agreement. And it was very powerful for me. Do I have an expectation that this person should be doing something different? Like that's what shows up for me, like a lot of times with family members. I just have an expectation, right? That
Mm-hmm.
they should be thinking the way I do, or they should be not doing what they're doing. And like the truth is, it's like, what's really the agreement that's been made? Like just nothing
Mm-hmm.
around it. So that's really also helped me clarify like where the should is kind of landing.
Right. I think it was Mark who mentioned that it also can help to know whether the people that you're dealing with have much of an understanding of GTD. And we may talk in terms of commitments and
Yeah.
projects and actions and all that. And it could be just speaking Greek to some family members who just don't really think that way. So,
Well, it's always an opportunity to, I just look at it, just a learning opportunity. So, I don't want to get in the business of, judging people because they're whatever, it's like, oh, it's just an opportunity for me to kind of deepen my own clarification and maybe in that, from that place, maybe even support someone in doing the same.
hmm.
And that, without quote unquote expectation.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah.
a lot of people ask me all the time, do your friends do GTD? I'm like, well, how much time do you have? Because I'd love for them. I'd love to all for us be speaking the same language, and I'd love for people to call me back when they say they're going to, and all of that. And you
Yeah.
know,
Hmm. Well,
I can't.
here's a little more from someone who was saying doesn't care for the look into projects the same way. I
Okay.
can't tell what done is for a research project, so it feels
Mm.
unclear because there's no finished. Uh, so can you help us with how to define done for a research project?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll do my best here. So to me, it's like, what are you, once again, I just keep coming back to what's the commitment. So I'm trying to think of another example in my world. So, if I want to, look into going to spending 2 weeks in France, I'm totally making that up.
Hmm.
But like, I'm not committed to going to France, but I might be committed to doing the research. So I get to define that for myself. What does done look like? Well, I mean, it's a great question. So maybe for me, and this is once again like where the natural planning model could really help clarify that, like, why am I even thinking about this, or what's the vision of success. But the outcome might be that I have all the information that I need, such that now I'm going to put this onto someday maybe, but when I'm ready, it's like I can just yank it right back on, right onto my active list. So just like any project, like, what does really done look like? It's like everyone gets to define that for themselves. It's like what David says, like the vacation, for some people it's, the minute they're like back on the plane returning home, that project is done. And for some people it's not until, the credit card bills have come in 2 months later.
Hmm.
So, I think my suggestion is don't, and once again, this is, everyone gets to play with this in a way that, is really unique to each person. But I wouldn't avoid it just out of like, what if I don't define the right outcome? It's like practice and play and experiment and see what shows up. And same time, I'm all for, not committing to something that you don't. I mean, this is part of why we're talking about this, is that not committing to something that you're not really going to follow through on. So
Hmm.
if kind of research feels like, I'm not really getting to the projects on my list in the first place. So if I tack on these research and I already know I'm not going to get to it, that to me sounds like that's just a straight on someday maybe anyway.
Ah, got it. So not blurring that line too much, and if it's really a someday maybe, don't turn it into a research project.
Exactly. Yeah, like watch what you're kind of trying to like slippery fish in and out of.
Right. The way it helps me to deal with research projects is the outcome is just to decide whether I want to commit to it even further.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. I love that. Thank you.
so I hope some of this has been helpful for a couple of you that were mentioning you don't really care for the look into and research projects. And Bernie mentions this is always good advice. Just having one next action, a first next action defined, helps to take the pressure off of any project, especially those research projects.
Well, I'm sure people have read the article about my mom. Like I became an amazing fan of like the really, really baby step kind of 3 foot toss next actions.
Hmm.
Something I really could commit to, like, versus like something that felt too big. So I think that's a great suggestion.
I had a class one time, some kind of experiential personal growth thing, I think it was years ago, where they actually did have that 3 foot toss. I'd heard that phrase for years, but they,
Mm.
they brought in a physical 3 foot ring toss game. And I'm the kind of fool who stood 20 feet back with the rings and kept throwing, thinking I want to win the big prize by having it land from 20 feet back. And it took me a while to realize that the smart people were the ones who stood 3 feet away and hit it
Yeah.
99% of the time. I was still standing back there thinking I want to win the big prize by making the the goal from way out. But the
Well,
three
I
foot
think
toss is
there's
what
a direct,
what wins the
yeah,
race.
it's a direct correlation. Like to me, the bigger, the scarier the project is, the more that next action needs to be very, very, very discreet and
Hmm.
like, you know, I just, maybe that's just me, but I
No,
just
I
find,
like
for
that.
projects I haven't done before, or there is very big stake in the ground for success or something where, and not to kind of beat the natural planning model with a dead horse, but like I'm a really big fan of any project that I haven't done before, making the natural planning model the next action, because
Hmm.
that will unpack it for me. Like, why am I doing this? Why is it important? What are the standards that need to be in place? And, what do I want it to look like? And then from there, kind of doing some brainstorming. And, for me, like that's what I always go to when I have a project that's either been handed to me or that I decide to take on, that I just feels really scary.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe there's some sort of a rule in there that there's an inverse relationship between the size or the importance of a project and the need for a very small, discrete next action.
Yeah, I remember a while ago I was working with this woman who, along the health theme was just in a lot of self-judgment around not exercising. It was just like you could just tell it was really bothering her. And so, we got to this place which was like, okay, I need to just find my running shoes. Like she didn't even know where they were. And it was like that, like she could do that. Like
Hmm.
it was like too scary to actually even research gyms in her area. Or, it was like, no, I'm just gonna like find my shoes.
Hmm.
It was a wonderful experience and opportunity for me to really get to that level where, what, momentum is momentum, right?
Hmm.
So I'd much rather have someone do like little baby thrusts of momentum than complete inertia.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Mark mentioned sometimes you have to trick yourself to take action, even if the action is so small as in open the Excel program.
If that's what it takes, that's what it takes, right?
Hmm.
I bet if we were really all, incredibly honest with ourselves, everyone on this webinar, we all have something that would lend itself to that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think
You
so.
know,
Well, the on this slide you'll notice the middle question is how can I break this down into a microscopic next step?
I
Um,
like that
yeah.
microscopic.
And we've got a couple of other questions here that may stimulate folks to find out ways to move projects forward. What am I pretending to know, but the data is not really there? What am I pretending not to know? The data is there and I just don't want to see it. Again, I can think of lots of things about health and family and those sort of difficult topics, finances, retirement. I can tell myself all kinds of things about retirement, but mostly I'm pretending to know something that I don't have data about.
Or for me, it's I think I should know.
Yeah.
That's the thing, that kind of common thing, in my world. Like it's like I'll stall out a little because I think that I should know. Like I should definitely know how to use Excel, or I should definitely know how to fill in the blank when, it's just something I'm just making up. You
Hmm.
know, no one's, you don't, you're not born like learning to use Excel. It's just a skill. And I actually, frankly, I think that's a lot of people kind of do that to themselves around GTD. They think they should know, so they just don't even start.
Hmm. Yeah. And the other question here, what negative outcome am I envisioning that I could reframe? For me, it's really difficult to come up with a nice project title and next action that draw me into to move forward when the
Yeah.
outcome I'm envisioning for the project is unpleasant in some way.
Yeah, it's like
So
a procrastination magnet.
a procrastination magnet, yes.
It will. It's like a procrastination inertia magnet. If your brain is already kind of, instead of like visioning wild success, visioning doom and gloom, like, wow, yeah,
Yep.
that's going to be tough too. That's going to be, tough to not only define the next action, but actually take it.
So one person here is asking, figuring out how to reframe negative outcomes is something I can't do at all. Any help on that? Huh. So Julie, what do you say when somebody has trouble
Well,
reframing
yeah.
a positive outcome?
Well, I think the mechanism is easy. My question is like, what's really underneath that? That's the challenge. Because if I say, I'll use the sewer thing. So like my kind of fear, like my negative outcome is that it's gonna take 3 months and cost $50,000, right?
Hmm.
Like that was my fear when the realtor called me and said you need to dig up the sewer line. That's the first thing that my brain went to.
Hmm.
So, it's like what's really, what's really actually possible framed in a positive way would be, well, wow, what if it's really easy and it's, only $2,500 and it takes a week,
Hmm.
or what if it's kind of like it's just reframing it through a different lens. It doesn't have to be like all Pollyanna, it can simply be like, wow, this is once again, like we're working that reticular activator. So it's like, the brain focuses on what we tell it to focus on. That's like fundamental GTD, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if like the brain, if we tell my brain it's going to be super scary and it's going to cost a gajillion dollars and, it's going to be like the amityville horror, then that's it's start
Mm-hmm.
where my brain goes. But if I tell my brain, it's like, no, 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 this is actually, this is going to be really easy. I'm going to get the resources that I need and I can manage this. My other question would be to whoever this person is asking, it's like, what really do you have some fear around even trying this out? Or
Mm.
maybe you might want to start with like something that's like a little less scary, like exercise. So like, what's the worst thing can happen in my exercise that I just, I don't do it. Like I completely
Mm-hmm.
just flake out on my commitment. Well, it's like, what's the positive outcome? Well, like what if I actually, get energy from doing this project? What if I get energy to start this process and it really starts to catalyze, more vitality in all areas of my life?
Mm.
So once again, I think the mechanism, it's just it's just practicing. If you're out of practice or just like anything, you just kind of want to start with something really small, start with like smaller things and start to reframe them in a way that's like, wow, this could, because it's whatever that is. It's like, it's the same mechanism to the brain,
Mm.
right? So envisioning like a bad outcome and envisioning a positive outcome, that's all happening in the mind. So I kind of go, well, I can do one or the other. So really it's just a choice.
Okay. Yeah. So,
But I'm going to have a better opportunity to have a positive result if I state a positive outcome on the
hmm
onset.
yeah, yeah. Hmm. All right. That leads us into this next item, which is, are there any projects you haven't defined but could? And originally this was haven't defined but should, and I changed it to say could, because the last thing we want to do is should on anybody. We're all very good at
Yeah. I
shoulding on
love that you caught
ourselves.
that. I love it.
Yeah, I knew Julie wouldn't let me get away with using the word should here. So the background image is a stethoscope. I figured something like calling attention to health could stimulate some of us to come up with projects that we haven't clearly defined. I did an interesting thing a few months ago when I got tired of thinking about my health in the middle of the night when I would wake up and go, I should do something about that. So I sat down and I went just thought about different parts of my body, up top to bottom, and said, is there any issue with that? Like, all right, my hair. What's going on with my hair? Am I worried that the fact that I'm prematurely gray indicates I'm deficient in magnesium or something like that? And I just kind of did a mind sweep by scanning my body. Why do I have more tension in my neck? And that led me to, I need to have my prescription checked for my glasses because I don't think I'm moving my head enough, and I'm kind of holding tension that way. Pretty much went top to bottom. I ended up making a couple of appointments with the general practitioner, the dentist, stuff like that. And I can't tell you how much it took some of that off my mind from the undefined anxiety stage into defined projects. So I'm putting
Mm.
out the call to all of you who are on the webinar. Is there anything that you haven't defined yet, but you could?
I think a great question that can really be a trigger for this is like, what am I avoiding?
Hmm.
What am I avoiding? What am I resisting? What am I, once again, like if we did a little independent survey here, we'd all have something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're avoiding something, and I think, the areas of focus can be a nice place to start. It's like, is there anything in my health or my finances or my relationships or my work, that I've been resistant to look at.
Mm-hmm. Uh,
And once again, it doesn't mean I'm committing to anything, but I'm committed to look at it.
yeah. Dave has something that's really helpful here. A not clearly defined project is the thing that makes my heart beat faster, not make me relax. So Dave, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's you watch for the things that make your heart beat faster and know that's where you need to put more attention on clearly defining the project. Is that what you were getting at there?
And I think, David, I just had John and I were
Yeah.
in LA a few weeks ago with David in the level 2, and he does a whole segment in the seminar around this. what are the things that it's so funny. I don't have the guide in front of me, but it was like, what are things that you've been wanting to learn that you haven't,
Hmm.
what are skills maybe that do you remember this, John, from the seminar?
Yeah,
So what
yeah.
are
It
skills
was
that you want to develop?
one
What
of
do you?
the trigger questions for surfacing projects was, are there any competencies you want to develop? And that could be in your career. Do you want to get better at a sport? Do you want to get better at playing a musical instrument? Better at dealing with your kids or your spouse? Any competencies to develop? Because the answer to that becomes a project.
Yeah, or even a someday maybe, but at least you're pulling it out of the, subconscious into, yeah, you're pulling it out of somewhat implicit into explicit.
Yeah. And Dave did follow up saying that anxiety comes from not defined projects.
Hmm.
Yeah, boy, that sure fits for me. I don't have anxiety over the stuff that's really clear, and I know I can take the action on it whenever I'm in the context for that. It's the anxiety I have is when I haven't really clearly defined the project, or I'm not really sure it's within my area of focus, but I'm telling myself I should have a project.
Hmm. That's great. Or maybe too, like, yeah, or the next action is still somewhat, amorphous, right?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So here are some trigger questions for uncovering scary projects or uncovering the projects that are underneath the anxiety. Any problems or issues you are worrying about, especially in the middle of the night? Is there anything you tell yourself you should be doing better, but better isn't planned out clearly? Yeah, that one seems to ring for a few people. That there's a should there, but it isn't clearly defined what the improvement would be. Ought to be different, but I'm not sure which way to go for it to be better. And anything around your job, finances, health, family, aging, parents, happiness, retirement, transitions. Boy, if that doesn't cover just about anything.
I think I can't remember if I ever told you this story, John, but some of the people that I've coached have heard me tell this story. So back in when did we do the GTD summit? It was like maybe '08 or '09 or something. And I just was going through a particularly stressful period. Just lot was going on in my world. And I remember like I woke up at like 4 in the morning, and I really felt like I was having as close to what I had experienced as like an anxiety attack or a panic attack.
Hmm.
And it was pretty uncomfortable. And I just was like, okay, like what can I do here? So I got out of bed, I made a cup of tea, and I just sat down with a piece of paper and I listed my areas of focus. So kind of like what you have here, like job, money, home,
Mm-hmm.
relationships, career. And then I was like, what am I stressed about in each of those areas? And
Can you
it
tell
was,
me? Can you tell me
yeah,
why these things seem to happen in the middle of the night? I noticed you said
I
I got out of
know.
bed. Why does this happen at 3 in the morning
Well,
or whatever time? Or is that
I
just
think
you and me? I don't know if
I
everybody else on the webinar finds that to happen.
Well, I think it's like for whatever reason, like I'm so busy during the day. It's like somewhere in the middle of the night where I kind of start to relax, and then all of a sudden my brain starts to remind me. It's kind of like the opposite of mind like water, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But I remember that to this day, where I listed all that was like feeling stressful about each area, and I literally just turned each one into a project.
Hmm.
And within about an hour, I was like off that ledge,
Yeah.
of panic. And thankfully, I haven't gone through that since then. So that's pretty great.
Yeah.
But the exercise, to me is just always, if anyone's really feeling like, gosh, I'm just in this place right now where I feel like nothing, I don't really feel in control. It feels a little overwhelming. It's like, what is it? Like really define like what the stress is and what you can actually do about it. Once again, we always come back to what's within your control,
Hmm.
you know. At the time, I was living with a good friend, and he was really having some challenges, and we were having to move out of the house. He was having to sell the house. Like that was not within my control, right?
Mm, right.
But it's like what I could do about my own living situation, or what I could do to provide support to him. Those were within my control,
Hmm.
and it just helped me really feel like, okay, there's a lot here that is outside of that, but I can certainly do what I can.
One of the things I heard you say in there kind of between the lines is that as soon as there's that anxiety or something that's keeping you from going to sleep or waking you up in the night, it's a trigger, it's a sign that it's time to externalize something. It's time to get something
Completely.
off my mind.
It's totally time. Yeah. It's like just sitting with that or avoiding it or resisting looking at it. It's, what does Billy Crystal say? It's not good for anybody.
There you go. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And oh, a couple of folks have chimed in that they either have this stuff come up just before they go to sleep and it keeps them from
Mm,
going to sleep, or wakes them up in the middle of the night when the subconscious starts to bring these things up that haven't been conscious.
yeah.
So let's see, a question for you here. How do you know if you have a scary project that you can just shove into the someday maybe box, and when does that box become an archive? So can you talk to us, Julie, about in a way how to use someday maybe effectively, but not have it be the undefined drawer in the center desk drawer that has all the junk in it that hasn't been decided
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to me, my criteria, whether it's active or someday, it's really based on one question. Can I commit to the next action? It's
on?
like if I can commit to that next action, like, okay, then it can stay on my active list. But if there's a part of me that's like, then it goes to someday maybe. So, it's a whole other, probably like another topic for a webinar in terms of how to manage like a gigantic someday maybe list that feels like a black hole. um, you know, Someday maybe, it does need to get reviewed. It needs to be organized in a way that it feels manageable, and that stuff needs to get reviewed periodically. Otherwise, you won't trust it.
Hmm.
And also, it's like it might just be like an internal reconciliation of like, I'm not committing to this stuff, so it's okay that it's kind of sitting here for a while. I mean, I've had stuff on Someday maybe for 10 years. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I go through that list and I call it,
Hmm.
but sometimes it's just like the mortality question of like, I'm going to have to let go of some stuff that I really think is important, and just, not make false meaning about myself, but just make that okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm making room, it's interesting. Like when I look at my life now, like it's a little, it's kind of stripped down, and I feel like it's a really, I feel like I know what I'm committed to, and I'm not my lists aren't over stuff. I don't have that sense of like overcommitment that I had for years and years and years and years. And once again, like maybe we do this as another webinar topic, John, but I have all kind of, suggestions around how to, manage someday maybe, so that it doesn't feel like it's this like yucky, scary thing, because
Hmm.
that's not going to work either.
Right. Yeah, actually that would be a good topic. I know some people barely use someday maybe. Some people, I know the one guy who has 1,000 or more on his someday maybe list, and he's comfortable with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So as we're kind of getting toward the end here, here's an idea. Pick the one that has your most has your attention. Call it the scariest one, the one that has most anxiety on it, whatever term you want to use. See if you can come up with a positive, successful outcome for that, and pick at least one next action, no matter how small it is. Microscopic is just fine. One of those projects that you can define as a positive outcome and make a next action for.
Yeah, I love that. I love for all of us, myself included here, just to really, leave this with, this isn't just this is, make it more experiential. It's like, what's one thing I can really, something, that's just been kind of out there somewhere,
Hmm.
that I want to tack into the ground more concretely.
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of them. I won't go into all the details and torture all of you with the details of the house projects and things like that. I'll save that for a forum post, but there are a couple of things I can do like that where I can change it to a successful outcome and pick a very small next action.
Terrific.
Well, we're at the top of the hour. Julie, thanks so much for talking with us here, and thanks to all of you who've been on the webinar. We had great participation from all of you. I hope this has been useful. I know we didn't come up with answers to completely resolve everybody's scary projects, but I hope we've at least given some leverage questions that'll help you get to move forward on them.
Yeah, thanks
And
everyone so much. This is really fun. I hope it's helpful.
take care, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.